Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Dr. Paul is traveling today, so I'll be taking it solo. Today, we're going to talk about Malaysian Airlines flight MH-17, which, as most of you know, was shot down over eastern Ukraine just over a year ago on July 17th, 2014. The flight was traveling from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. 283 passengers and 15 crew lost their lives over the villages of eastern Ukraine. To discuss the issue with me is my old friend, Phil Giraldi. Phil and Dr. Paul and I go way back. Phil was one of our regular guests at Dr. Paul's Thursday lunches, where he briefed members of Congress many times over the years. So, Phil, it's wonderful to have you with us, and thanks for giving us some of your time.
Thank you, Dan. Good to be here.
Well, as I mentioned, a year ago, this horrible tragedy happened. Initially, of course, Ukraine immediately blamed Russia and the Russian-backed separatists. The U.S. unsurprisingly took that line and ran with it immediately and immediately blamed the Russia or Russian-backed separatists. And that became the conventional wisdom. The initial assessment that came out pretty much drew that conclusion. But 1 year later, there really has not been any shift in what the U.S. knows. What happened yesterday, Phil, and the reason we wanted to talk about this today, is that although we're expecting the final report out in October of this year on the Shootdown, for some reason there was a UN draft to set up a tribunal on the lines of that which was set up for Rwanda genocide and Yugoslavia to look into this. And from what Russian ambassador to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, said, this is a very unusual move when we don't even have the final report. We don't have the information. It doesn't make sense. It's not a crime that threatens world peace like the others. And so Russia did veto it yesterday. And I know this might shock you, Phil, but the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, used it as an opportunity to grandstand and claimed that Russia is denying justice to the victims. So, did you have a chance to look over this move yesterday, and what do you make of it?
Well, it's clearly, as you're implying, I mean, what they really want to do is to turn this incident into either something akin to a terrorist attack or a war crime. And they want to frame it that way. And of course, the Russian ambassador is absolutely correct in that we don't have enough information on this. Not enough hard information has been revealed regarding what actually happened to push it that way. And Samantha Power, of course, is showing her true colors. Basically, she's been playing the role of antagonist against the Russians for quite some time now. She's clearly in the Victoria Nuland mold, and it's totally expected that she would come out with this. And
the issue is, they may be right, she may be right. The Russians themselves may have shot it down. People they back in eastern Ukraine may have shot it down. Ukraine may have shot it down. We even saw last week, I don't know if you saw this, someone claimed that one of the oligarchs may have had it shot down with an Israeli missile. So there are all sorts of things out there. I think as you pointed out in something we'll talk about later, someone is lying. We know that much. But it was odd that this resolution was co-drafted by Ukraine, which, if you're looking at this as a crime, they are one of the suspects. So I think that's rather odd, don't you, to have one of the suspects drawing up this tribunal.
Well, they're not only one of the suspects, they're the suspect that has the strongest motive. So let's put it in that frame.
Yeah.
And it's bizarre that the fact that the Ukraine has been participating in this process with the Dutch, because obviously the Ukraine have all kinds of vested interests that play out here. So you have to suspect the entire process. It was like they decided a year ago that this was something that was going to be pinned on the Russians or on Russian surrogates. And they really have not backed off from that. The other distinct possibility, of course, is that this whole thing was an accident, and we don't know where the evidence points, and it's really premature for either the United Nations or the United States acting through the United Nations to be taking some kind of position on this, particularly as you've also noted, there's been no real reporting from the U.S. government in terms of what they know.
The group that you're affiliated with, the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, it's a group of, I think, several dozen former CIA and other intelligence community analysts and operatives. They sent they sent an open letter to President Obama about a week ago, I guess it was, urging him, really in the interests of the gravity of the situation, the implications of worsening relations with Russia, urging him to release more information if they have it that proves one way or other the position of the U.S. As we pointed out, the U.S. has not changed its initial assessment, which the VIPS letter points out was not an intelligence assessment, capital I, capital A, but rather a government assessment. Can you maybe walk our viewers through the difference between those?
Yeah, the difference is that if you have an intelligence assessment, that means that the intelligence community, all 17 organizations, is behind the assessment. If you have a government assessment, that implies that the intelligence community does not agree and that the assessment is being released basically at the whim, as it were, of the White House.
So if the intelligence community agreed with the assessment, one would think that the White House would rather have the brand name, IA, intelligence assessment. So we can assume maybe. Exactly right. Mm-hmm. So we could assume that there's. I mean, what do you think may have happened? Sort of walk us through in your imagination what may have happened with this.
Well, there are certainly a plenitude of rumors going around about MH-17 and what actually happened. And certainly there are some very strong rumors within the intelligence community among former intelligence officers like myself. We've heard very much that there was a lot of pushback from the intelligence community saying that no, the solution or that the Dutch were coming up with, which was essentially to pin it circumstantially on the Russians, is rather misleading, that there are a number of other players, and these other players had stronger motives and they had the ability to do it. So they're essentially saying, let's look at all of the evidence, and if we can't come up with a conclusion, let's say that we can't come up with a conclusion.
I think there might be a tendency among some who are skeptical of the government to put the CIA and the other intelligence analysts in a box and say they're all the bad guys. But the fact of the matter is, as you well know, in things like the 2007 NIE on Iran, they've actually performed heroically in the face of a lot of opposition. So there are plenty of intelligence analysts there who will stand by their guns and refuse to go along with these things. But what would you say, Phil? How would you, because you urge them to release more information. We know that the U.S. has enormous technical collection capabilities, analytical abilities. What do you think could be out there? How does it look, and what might be there?
Well, I think the answer here is again, it's a political answer. I think what probably the intelligence community is saying is that we've looked at all the evidence. And there probably is a ton of evidence of various kinds. None of it is a smoking pistol. And we would prioritize the possible culprits based on motivation and other factors. And maybe this is the way it plays out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm just guessing on that. But I would suspect the intelligence community has come up with that kind of analysis. And of course, the White House does not want to hear that. Mm-hmm. They essentially, for reasons that elude me, in terms of why are we deliberately going about to worsen relations with Russia, which is the only country in the world that can destroy us, for reasons of its own, is basically pushing a certain hostility towards Russia, and this has been exhibited more and more recently, and it's something that's very, very hard to understand.
Now, do you think they would know things like, for example, where the missile was fired from, or whether it may have been a jet fighter that shot it, as some people speculate? I mean, suppose, from what I've read, there was U.S. satellites in the area. They had the technical capacity to know more than they have released. Now, obviously, they want to protect sources and methods, but can you give us some insight on what they may know? Well,
there are two things you have to consider. First of all, the Ukraine and that entire area was an intelligence hotspot. It was basically of a great deal of interest to policymakers in Washington and in London and elsewhere. So many of the satellites that we have that have incredible capabilities are targetable, where you kind of can move them to where you want them to be so that you have 24/7 coverage. And I'm sure that we had that kind of coverage over that area of Ukraine. Now, what they might have picked up, they might have picked up electronic intelligence telling them about a missile. They might have had radar, SIGINT type intelligence telling them about other planes being in the area. I can only speculate in terms of what they might have been able to get, but they certainly got a lot of stuff. And the question is, to what extent is this stuff, does this stuff make a convincing case based on solid evidence, or is it just stuff that kind of can fit a number of scenarios? And I kind of am suspecting it is the latter. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're seeing this kind of ambivalence coming out of the intelligence community.
Seems like the administration is enjoying this ambiguity, not really being able to say Russia did it and here's why, but being able to hint at it. Victoria Nuland herself a few months ago gave a speech where she talked about how many people were killed by pro-Russia rebels, and then she said, and MH-17 was shot down in the same sentence, the way she put it. You know, so clearly they're enjoying this ambiguity to poke a stick at Russia. But the other thing that your letter points out, you urge the president to seek independent intelligence analysts. And certainly to me that implies that you all understand that there are some people around the president that have agendas that are not getting at the truth. There's something else. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, well, the thing is, you know, when intelligence reports, this is the end product of the analysis of information, are prepared, a good report will include dissent. It will include analysts who are saying, no, this doesn't necessarily suggest this or suggest that. It may be this or it may be that. So what we're basically saying is that the White House really should, instead of just jumping into groupthink, should really be, you know, going into the reporting on this and identifying the people who are saying, well, maybe it isn't this way. And those are the people they should be talking to. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. The system is geared towards consensus. And this is true of the U.S. government at every level. And unfortunately, consensus does not necessarily equal the truth.
Yeah. And even in the initial government assessment, they admitted that they had used social media, I think they said, as some of their sources. Doesn't that strike you odd as a career intelligence officer to to be looking at Twitter? I'm sure there's a lot of intelligence on Twitter, but is it a substitute for for hard data?
Well, I've seen odder things than that, I'll tell you. But the fact is, a lot of what passes for intelligence is taking some other source and trying to figure out what it means in a context that makes sense to you. So the use of social media doesn't surprise me. I know that there's been a kind of a revolution in terms of intelligence analysis that has basically gone for what they call open source. And open source does include this kind of thing. I think it's a bit goofy, but, you know, hey, why are we paying only $80 billion a year for our intelligence program? When
we can get Bellingcat for free. Well, Phil, this is unfortunately not going to go away, I think. And, you know, I do think that letters like Vip's did are very helpful because they can be, we reprinted it on the Institute's website. I know Robert Perry over Consortium News and many others reprinted it. So it does bring these things to light. And as you pointed out, the signatories to the letter have, you know, more than 300 years of experience collectively. So I think that's very important. But I know the both of us will keep an eye on it. We both understand, and most of our viewers understand, the importance of not going down this road with Russia that we are. And as you pointed out in many things you've written, it doesn't mean we're in love with Putin. It doesn't mean anything other than that we don't want to live through a nuclear war. So I really want to thank you for joining me. It's always great to talk to you. I want to thank all of our viewers for watching this show. Please turn back to the Liberty Report soon.
Thank you, Dan. My pleasure.
Thanks.